as mentioned, this is about how to bring the band back together, rock on. It's a really popular saying, and yet there was one song that started it all. It's by David Essex. It was released in the UK in 1973, and to demo this, he went to the record label, just picked up a trash can, the engineer put a microphone, and he started banging out that really slow tempo, and the rest is pretty much history. It's number 5 in the US Top 100. Def Leppard did a pretty good remake of it, and it's also been featured in The Sopranos, but importantly for you, we made you a playlist, and you get both Def Leppard and David Essex on your playlist for the low, low price of free.
All right. I know we have a lot of people who've been with us for this entire series, so you are well familiar with this, and we do have a few people who are new. So this is the tool that we use to interact with you all. It's really important to us that we're getting your thoughts and opinions in the mix. And so we're going to ask you to grab your smartphone, smart device. It's the easiest way to do it. You can also open up a second browser on your computer if that is what you have available to you. You're going to go to menti.com, menti.com. Use the code 878557, and many of you have been putting in your response to our introductory question, so feel free to put in your vote for the artist or band that you would consider to be the greatest ever. And so I just have to give props to whoever put in Rick Astley. Never Gonna Let You Down. Appreciate that one. We have Everything U2 seems to be winning. Jimi Hendrix was winning for a while. U2 seems to have taken the lead, the one that is largest in the middle. That just means multiple people are voting for it. If you cannot access Mentimeter, you can always feel free to put your response to any of the questions in the chat, and Jamie Dix will go ahead and enter those for you so that you do not miss out. And we do not miss out on who you happen to think your musical taste is. So everything from the Beatles to Bono to 30 Seconds to Mars, Michael Jackson, we've got it all in here. So a couple of questions that are a little bit more on topic. This is Rock On, bring the band back together. We'll get into, there's a lot of different definitions. I think for us personally, for the Leadership Institute, when we walked out of the doors 7, 8, 9 weeks ago and started working from home, we thought there's going to be a day that we all just kind of magically walk back in. We're starting to realize that might not be true. And so all of us are considering what kind of changes are we going to need to make. And so for you all, where are you at on the spectrum? Perhaps it is status quo. We were an essential business. Actually, we put in the safety procedures, but pretty much we're going to kind of go back to quote unquote normal. For some of us, it's a few modified policies, a little tweaks here and there. For some of us, we are going to look nothing like we did. As it turns out, working from home virtual really works for us, and we're going to lean into that. Or perhaps it is still yet too early to tell. So it looks like this group is fairly split. So one of you out there that says, and if you want to put in the chat what your secret is, feel free, that it is status quo, and then a lot of us that are anywhere on the spectrum. So our goal is to give you some frameworks, some thought processes, no matter where you're at on this kind of change spectrum.
I like that there's the group here that says, you tell me, too early to tell. And we're like, okay, I guess we're consultants. I'll tell you.
Yeah,
I'll tell you later.
I'll tell you.
Right.
We're going to give you some thoughts. Second question for you. What % of U.S. workers would leave their current job for one that allowed them to work remotely? So acknowledging that not all of us have this option, a good percentage of us have been living the work from home life. Some of us can't wait to get back to the office, and other of us say, you know what, it's actually pretty great. I just make my coffee in the morning, turn right down the hallway, and I end up in my home office. So what % of U.S. workers would leave their current job for one that allowed them to work remotely? And you all are smart. You got it, 54%. So over half of us would consider this as a good option. The next question that we're going to ask you is going to seem a little specific, but there is a reason for it. And that is, what % of people said that weak internet prevented them from working from home? And so some of the things that we take for granted is that we have the infrastructure built to allow people to do this. I know that we have been fighting this fight on people's video, people's sound, and the challenges that that entails. And so is it 15, 25, 35, or 45%? You all are correct. It is 35%. So a third of us say that this is the barrier. And so as I mentioned, that might seem like one isolated part of the issue, but as we're thinking about how do we bring our band back together, whether that is virtually or in person, are we thinking about all the infrastructure things that have to take place?
And Sarah, I think the other 65% that prevented us from working more effectively were, in a word, kids.
100%.
Children.
100%. That
Locking
is
myself away
definitely.
from mine.
All right, and as we transition back over into the slides, we are going to start with some things that have been heavily mentioned. So if you're out there on LinkedIn, you're reading all the blog articles, these things are heavily mentioned. We're not going to go into great detail, not because we don't think that they're important, but we want to give you some things that are additive to, yes, increased cleaning, yes, perhaps there's a phased approach. 100% we need to be starting with the safety of people first and foremost. There's going to be hybrid options for a lot of us, perhaps it's split shifts. And yes, those work from home policies, and encourage anybody to put in the chat anything that you kind of see as a given. These are things that we're all going to have to wrestle with, but we're not going to spend a lot of time. What we are going to do is give you kind of a framework for thinking. So no matter what your industry, where you're located in the globe, what you have in front of you, if you've been in essential business or not, a thinking process as you think about bringing your team back together. We're also going to give you quite a few case studies. And so different than webinars in the past, we wanted to bring forward some organizations that we have seen doing a really good job. Some of them client organizations, others are not, but organizations that perhaps are providing some models for us all to follow. We love this quote from the executive director of Stanford's design school, and it's essentially about the fact that it's not just one big change that we're going through. It's not one moment in time that it all changed and then we can react to that one specific change. It's really about reacting to all of the changes that keep coming at us. So in times of great uncertainty, the most critical skill is to be able to adapt as conditions change continually. This kind of ambidexterity, focusing on surviving in the current moment, while also apportioning a piece of our mindset, our brain power, our time, our talent toward thriving in a different future. One of the questions that is good to discuss as a team is what % of our effort is being applied to the recovery, the immediate, the right now, and what % is being applied to how do we get ready for what's next, which is what this webinar is about. We know, because we've been chatting with you all over the past 8-9 weeks, we've probably asked easily 1,000 people this question: how will your business perform post-COVID? Same as before, better than before, worse than before, or I don't know. Many of you have actually answered this question, so your responses are included in this total. By a drastic percentage, the least popular response is same as before. So we're all in different situations, but the one commonality is something's going to change. So the change reality looks like, yes, perhaps all of us are considering digital options that we weren't considering before. We're looking at how do we balance productivity with how do I get FaceTime with people, whether that's virtually, that work-life blend. How do I incorporate the human skills as we navigate what is an entirely human worldwide challenge? What are the concerns over safety? What's the role that IT plays, and how do we connect safely? So the change reality is really multifaceted. It's, as I mentioned, not just one significant thing that we're tackling. And so with any of these situations, working a process, and there's a lot of them out there, is typically how you handle adaptive change.
And when you think about change, as Sarah mentioned, there's a lot of models out there, but ideally what this means is I'm just simply adapting into a new environment. And so when we think about an environment that changes drastically, very quickly, the military kind of comes to view, and this is a quote by John Boyd. He was a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot. He's retired and passed away a few years ago, but this was his kind of quote. He developed this mechanism for thinking about adapting to quickly changing environments. The ability to operate at a faster tempo than an adversary enables one to fold the adversary back inside himself, and he can either appreciate or keep up with what's going on. I know it's a little like, gosh, that's a lot of military there, Matt. It's a fighter jet, and we're talking about adversaries. The idea is, and so in the military, we would say, could you get inside of someone's OODA loop? Can I observe? Can I orient? Can I decide and act faster than the other person is doing that as well? Because that's what humans are doing constantly. I'm looking around, I orient to a different thing, I make a decision, and then I act. So if we're going to take this model and get inside someone else's OODA loop and get faster about this, I'm going to transition that into a more universal and civilian and kind of business standpoint about how we think about reimagining work. And similar to the OODA loop or other types of change management kind of techniques, we look at the first thing we're going to do is we're going to assess. I'm just going to take more information in from the environment so I make better decisions. I'm going to measure what matters, set some baselines. I'm going to align. Maybe it's rebuilding my team, aligning to some more critical work priorities. I'm going to accommodate. That's probably going to require something different. So that's where flexibility, optionality, we'll get into that. And the last one is that I'm going to adapt. And so that's the model we're going to take you through. So the first one is going to be to assess. I'm going to give you a few ways you can do this, a few methods. Method number one, probably one of my favorite ones, because I think the information one is so deep and I get to build relationships with the people inside the organization. Some basic things about running focus groups. We recommend you run them in an hour duration with about 25 attendees. Anything over that, it makes it challenging to get everyone's input. And so we say keep it around there. We've done it both ways. Cross-section, you get a good view of the organization. However, if I want to know just about a department, I keep it focused there. I'm asking things like, what are your concerns? What's been your greatest system frustration? What's preventing you from doing your best work? All of these, by the way, I'm asking open-ended questions. In other words, they can't be answered in yes or no. Did the company do a good job supporting you? Yes or no? How is the company's support during this time? I want better details. I'm not going to do. We do not believe in forcing people into the session because those are just people that do not want to talk. And so we ask for the volunteers because they're the ones who are going to offer something. I don't want the good news, but I want people who are passionate about it and willing to sit in there and give me the whole spectrum. Don't hog the airtime. Sorry if that's a colloquial phrase. It just means be careful about how much, if you're running the focus group, your talk time percentage of that whole hour should be about 5%. That's it. The rest of the time, other people are talking. You're just asking the questions to get them to chat. Don't offer solutions. Do not be the corporate spokesman. All we're asking for is to get better information. That's the internal focus group. When we're asking this, a lot of times what you'll hear things like, well, I think communication should be better, or communication's a problem. So we are working with a specific client, and this was a professional sports team. So we were doing this, and when we're asking these questions, this is the question that we constantly ask to drill down from a very broad kind of topical thing, like communication could be better. Can you tell me a specific story about that? So in this case, I'm working with this pro sports team. The person said, well, I'm told that I cannot go to my level colleague at a different department. What I need to do is I have to email communicate with my supervisor, who then communicates with the department head. That department head communicates to the other department head, then it goes down in their chain, then that person can respond. That's a really good story. And of course, when the organization hears that, it's something we go out and we're looking to get people in trouble. When we hear that, we go, it's not communication. That's a very specific, actionable step that we can take to stop that from happening. So as a good example of, can you tell me a specific story, gets you into actionable kind of information you can actually do. Listening, especially with these internal focus groups, these are some side benefits you get. Do you get actionable stories? Can you make improvements? Absolutely. And I'm going to make better improvements on how I'm changing the internal environment for my people. I also get better trust, better empathy. I understand a lot more. People feel cared for and valued. I humanize the online studies. So regardless of what engagement survey you've ran before, I'm going to humanize that by asking people for their feedback on this. And so this is a good image of Quincy Jones, and this is exactly how it should look like in a focus group. I am just locked in and listening to what you have to say about all of these things. We have built a survey, and the reason for this survey is because we realize when sometimes I'm thinking about the organization or I have a perception or a gut feeling or intuition, I want to turn it into data. And studies have shown that if I focus in on the people, how they align to the purpose, and how the actual work is aligned, I'll get better engagement, I'll get higher levels of innovation, and I'll get higher revenue. If I'm thinking about a time when I have to go through change, that innovation part is really critical. So we developed our own cultural performance survey. The important part, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, this is not a sales pitch on this, I'm just mentioning we developed our own that we run with clients, because oftentimes what you'll see in the world is a huge focus on how are people behaving, interacting with one another. Really important. That's that top block you see under people. We do want to understand the purpose and how it aligns to this. You'll see that in a lot of surveys as well. Where a lot of surveys don't go into with the detail is, I want to know about how the job, how the work is literally aligned, how it's structured, how it's set up. The reason for that is I focus a lot on the behaviors, but a lot of times the systems will be driving what behaviors I see. Great World Blue research study, 75% of what makes a great culture is not in the perks, even who's at the top, not the ping pong tables, not the beer, although I do like the beer, not all that kind of side stuff. It's the way you've designed the systems and the processes. So the way we get into that is by asking some very specific questions about the work and how it's aligned, especially at a time now, because you might say, the last thing I'm going to do right now is run some kind of engagement survey. If I'm running a survey, though, that tells me about people's behavior, lets me know how they're aligned to the purpose, the impact, and meaning, and how the work is structured and aligned, I actually do want to know that in my assessment portion of this change management. I can reveal some really good strengths. I can reveal some areas that I probably need to improve. My favorite question, if you're like, I don't have time for all that, I got time for one question, great. Here's the question you ask. What's the one thing that no one knows about your job that they wish they did? People are going to give you two answers. One is going to be on how impactful that person thinks their work is or isn't, and they're going to talk about how difficult it is. So we chose the internal workings of an automatic transmission or a manual transmission inside of it to cut away to say there's so much going on in there that you're probably not aware of. And when I do think about that, I'll get deeper into what work is like for that person. The reason that's important is if you want great customer experience, it will never exceed your employee experience. And if Sarah comes off mute, I'll just let you know this is the who. Go ahead.
I did. I had to ask him when I saw the picture. I'm like, who is that? And it is the who. So method 1 and method 2, we focus strongly on the team member experience in our assessment. The good reason for that is just this point that Matt just made. Yes, we want to get our customers back. Yes, we want to have a strong customer experience, but how do we start with our people first? So we're going to bring you back into Menti and ask you a couple of questions about your customer experience. And so the first one is, I want you to assess yourself. Do I know what my customers are thinking right now? Is it a total mystery to you? Or are you on the spectrum of, I have complete confidence, I know exactly what my customers are thinking right now? So where are you on the spectrum? I have no idea how they're weathering the storm or how we can serve them, all the way to absolutely 100%, I know exactly what we can do for our customers. And so as these are coming in, behind you see the standard deviation. So automatically we see kind of a split. We don't all agree. And that makes sense. We're probably a little over the map, depending on what our industry is and what the state of that industry is. But coming out at about a 5.9. So for most of us, there's at least somewhat of a gap that we need to close. And so how do I assess the lifeblood of my organization? How do I assess the customers and where they're at? A couple additional questions for you all to consider. And the next one is, what % of buyers are willing to pay for a better customer or a great customer experience? So what % of buyers will pay a premium for an increase in customer experience? So as those responses come in, 36%, 86%, 54%, or 60%. So this one, it is actually 86%. So a vast majority of us are willing to actually pay more for a better customer experience. So if we combine those last two questions, do I understand what my customers are thinking? And they would be willing to pay. These are 2020 statistics. A third question for you, what % of buyers make impulse purchases after receiving a more personalized experience? So perhaps I wasn't even in the market for that. I wasn't considering this as a purchase, but I was treated so well, and that actually, yeah, I am going to buy that make-at-home meal kit. Thank you, HelloFresh. Appreciate the personalized experience, whatever it happens to be. So is that 26%, 49%, 35%, or 15%? And you guys got this one at 49%. So a good percent of it out there that will increase and spend those extra dollars if I feel like I'm being well taken care of. So we wanted to give you a really kind of straightforward tool. There's lots of ways that you can assess this. We're not going to go into all of them, but you can certainly go out and you can do the surveys. You can look at what's going on in social media. We're going to dig into customer interviews and give you a little bit of a tool for that one. Yes, focus groups, and then putting a net promoter score is the reason why we ask you all at the end of the webinars if you could please fill out that survey, because it really does matter to us what you think. So before I give you the tool, we're going to play a short video on perhaps what, let's just say, not so good customer service might look like. And this will be a familiar clip, I think, to most of you.
And just to tee this up, this is Seinfeld. George Costanza is trying to meet Jerry and Elaine, who have gone to the movies already, and he's calling to find out what movie he's going to go see. So here we go.
Jerry, great. Probably went to the 84th Street. That's where I always go with Jerry.
Hello, and welcome to Movie Phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to see, press 1.
Come on.
Using your touch-tone keypad, please enter the first 3 letters of the movie title now. You've selected Agent Zero. If that's correct, press 1.
What?
You've selected Brown-Eyed Girl. If this is correct, press 1. Why don't you just tell me the name of the movie you selected?
All right, so not the ideal customer experience that we all would want, but a good classic clip. So if you haven't seen that episode, highly recommend. So this is the tool that we want to give you. How do you have a voice of the customer conversation? And so perhaps in a larger organization, this has to take place with a survey. We do a lot of good work with an airline who has offered up miles for people to kind of say, hey, would you participate in a focus group? So there's lots of things that you can do to make this scalable. And for a lot of us, this just looks like I'm just going to pick up the phone. And I'm going to start by saying this isn't a sales call, and we genuinely want your opinion. We know that in general, for humans, we love to be asked our opinion. In fact, if you look at an MRI brain scan, the portion of our brains that lights up when getting a reward is the same piece of our brain that will light up when we're being asked our opinions. So people will enjoy doing this. I want to ask, to the point earlier, a lot of open-ended questions. And I'm going to start with that customer. How have you weathered in the past few months? What does your business look like? Where are you thinking about allocating resources towards? Perhaps you're launching a new product or service. And so I want to be able to ask, have you subscribed to this type of service before? And do you know anybody who's doing it really, really well? What gaps are you seeing? So I'm trying to assess the pain points of my customers so that I can make better decisions on the back end, whether it's launching a new product or service, or perhaps making tweaks to my existing model. So we will absolutely give you this slide. I know there's a lot of text on it and a lot of detail, but you can have this as a guide to kind of think about, if I'm going to pick up the phone and call one of my customers, what are the things that I'd like to ask? And a great quote from Aretha Franklin is, sometimes what you're looking for is already there. And so perhaps these conversations will give you some of the answers that you're really searching for.
Yeah, thank you. Moving in. So let's talk about how we actually do some of this. One way is pivoting around our core purpose, right? Our core purpose, our values, and you can see these steps here. What's the vision? What does our world look like? Goals are a compelling vision of the organization in 3 to 5 years. The strategies, how you break through, that leads into key initiatives. We call them must do, can't fail. This is a little bit of strategic planning that we do with our clients. And then resources. How do we align to each key initiative to ensure success? A quick case study on this one about aligning around a core purpose would be Airbnb. As you know, the hospitality and hotels and Airbnb, really difficult environment for them right now. They're all about this creation of a community. And one thing Airbnb launched around was called Airbnb experiences. So these were times that if you went to and stayed at an Airbnb with a host, you could also take an experience. So it might be wine tasting in the hills of Italy. It might be learning how to salsa dance in Spain or something like this. But there was an experience that you would have along with when you were staying in these places. Obviously, they can't do that with the social distancing, the global pandemic. So they converted this around this purpose about connecting people. And they actually are doing these same experiences. You can check this out. It's really actually an interesting If you go to the website, you're going to spend a lot of time on it. It's so well done. They did it in a couple of weeks. They pivoted all of their Airbnb experiences to an online format. It's not just a tech issue, and now we're going to put it. They worked with these experienced people, the hosts, the people that were leading the experience. They worked with them. They got them the right lighting. They talked about all these things. And so now you can be on with a bunch of other people around the world learning how to cook with a top French chef. Because now the French chef is there. They're online. It's like one of these. I know right now you're thinking, well, why am I on this webinar if I can go do that? Exactly. It's not just a tech issue, though. It was about them pivoting around this core purpose and values portion of it. And so a really good example of how Airbnb was able to utilize this framework to actually still serve their client base, even when their client base is all about people literally being together. Number 2, make the implicit explicit. That's a great saying for organizations that have not used their values or talking about what we stand for, our purpose. This is the time. So you can see the David Essex Rock On, literally the sheet music for it. I need to talk about what the organization stands for, how things are done, how everyone can contribute, what's expected. Yes, this is communication, but it's really, really important to say, well, anytime you're saying to yourself, well, as an organization, we all know that. That's when I'm putting it down on paper. That's when I'm communicating it. Make the implicit, those things that feel like everyone knows it, make it explicit. Because I want it top of mind for people as we're going through this type of change. This one, simplify. So this is a picture of Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. Quasi country music finally made it in here. But the idea here is when simplifying, this is an acoustic set. So I'm just going to actually simplify a lot of what was before a lot of motion. I want to really focus in on just what those key things are. I'm going to move any deadline that can be moved. I'm going to move that. I'm going to take a second look at all the targets that we set before the pandemic. This is not different in our organization. We had a lot of projects going on, and we're distilling those down, or what are the absolute key ones I need to get done. I rethink the timing literally of performance reviews. It's now really the best time to be doing those. And I'm going to remove a lot of the lower priority items from the to-do list. I really just need to focus in on what are the important parts here. And just the last quote here by Adam Grant does some really good research. Work from home has extended the workday on average 2 to 3 hours. So when you think about all the work your people are putting in, what I don't want them doing is worrying about performance review. I don't want them doing low priority work and the deadlines that are unnecessary. If they're working that hard, I want to push those off when and if possible. So that's a little bit on the deadlines. The fourth one here, how to communicate. Picture, nice picture of Joe and Jet. It's interesting when we've been doing some consulting in the communication space with a lot of organizations. Sometimes they're doing all the right things, but the way they're bringing it out usually sits right in that logic, the logic information. If I think about when we work with C-suite people, a lot of times they're more analytical at times, how they got to their position. And so sometimes in the communication, especially under degrees of heightened stress and anxiety, they really tend to sit in that logic information part. It's perfectly fine, but I also want to bring in the other ones. If you were on our track earlier with more cowbell last week, we talked about emotional intelligence. This is how you convey emotional intelligence in a communication, whether that be email, written, whatever. This is, I'm going to talk about the emotions about it, how I feel, and I'm going to acknowledge how others are going to feel. I will give the logical information. I'm going to bring it back to the values, the purpose about what the organization stands for, and then I might even bring in, here are some other perspectives we considered. So important that we communicate in all of those ways. Hey, sir, we're not picking up your audio as we move into accommodate, so if you can come off on audio, and if not, perfect.
Better. All right. As we move around this model, we're thinking about how do we accommodate. So we've assessed, we've aligned with the work, and we know a lot of accommodations need to take place. So the first piece of this is just to kind of share a few stats of all the data that's been kind of flooded in about how people are feeling. A good percentage of us, a majority of us say, I actually want to still continue working from home. Additionally, people are saying, actually, I'm more productive at home. So 75% of us say that I'm productive 75% of the time working from home, versus I'm productive 63% when I'm working at the office. So that may or may not be true for each of us individually. 60% of us are willing to work from home permanently. And so given that sentiment, or at least that current feeling, how do we think about accommodating? One of the case studies we wanted to share with you was Ferrari, and for a few reasons, one of which is being based in Italy, they're a little ahead. I know we do have quite a few international people listening in. We also have a predominantly United States-based audience. So Ferrari is a little bit ahead of us in terms of their thinking. And Matt's going to ask me what Ferrari that is. I do not know. I would call that a fast one. So Ferrari, this is how they broke down the challenge. One of the things that they did early on was to say, we're going to have a very small task force. And the size was actually important. They realized that bringing together all of their department heads, the inertia of that was just too much. And so we're going to have the essential people who are very quickly going to make decisions. And yes, they looked at all the procedures, the PPE, the new layout for the manufacturing, all of those kind of things, but they also distilled what are the behavior guidelines. And this is a step that a lot of people kind of skip over, by being really explicit about what I need you to do, how you behave as a member of this organization. Then they looked at, okay, for the employee's perspective, and we do have to look at the medical screening. We have to look at how we want people to opt in and be volunteers into the tracking. And then how do we apply that medical care? What's really interesting is then they took it one step further and said, yes, our employees, but we have other stakeholders. And so how do we take all the good work that we're doing and apply it to our communities? How do we apply it to the families of our team members? And so just an interesting case study of somebody who's put a lot of thought into this that we can all learn from. The essence of what they're doing is kind of creating optionality. And so we've used this phrase in previous webinars to talk about how am I having options inside the business, but it also equally applies to how am I having options for my people. So the definition, the quality of being available to be chosen, but not obligatory. Essentially, how am I going to hedge all of my bets? And instead of trying to predict what is going to happen, I'm going to position myself in a way that I actually have some optionality. So ways that we can do this, or at least questions that we can ask ourselves. Some of it starts with, I need to think about what am I willing to let go of? I'm just going to say no to some things. What resources can I divert? And perhaps those are people resources that say, I need you to be full-time dedicated to this transition. Who can I learn from? Who can I help? Whether that's a partner or somebody that I might think of in a different capacity. And what can I repurpose? Oftentimes we'll find ourselves trapped in kind of a binary. It's either this or that. And so asking the question, what sits in between those two options? What sits in the gray area that may actually be the better choice? And so one additional case study for you all would be Facebook, and really kind of leading the way on how do I ensure that the humans that make up this company know that really it's them that matters. And so they've suspended all of their performance ratings. They are going to, because of their financial position, they're able to pay bonuses, but they're going to pay them as if employees exceeded expectations for the first half of the year. I'm just going to take out the stick part. I'm just going to give you the carrot as it relates to bonuses. We're going to extend childcare benefits and new leave options for caregivers. We have to reconcile what happens because summer camps and daycares and all of those things predominantly have canceled. And I'm going to allow leaders in the organization to reshuffle priorities. And so the people closest to the work are going to feed up. Here's what we need to be focused on in this moment. So another good case study of what a well-known organization is doing.
Hey, sir, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go back to one really quick point. I was thinking about this under the create optionality, the third bullet here, what partnerships can help and who can you learn from? I will tell you, we often ask the question, well, what unforeseen, not to make light of the pandemic, but what unforeseen benefit has happened? The number of people at leadership levels and the number of people in organizations who are willing to share what they know about this. I think one thing that's happened is people really wanting to serve each other. And so I would offer on that third question, what partnerships can help. Ask your team that. Who do we know in this space that's doing this similar that we can just reach out to? Every single time we've asked that question and we've seen people reaching out, the outpouring of support from people to people, it is an interesting way that we think about, I have to be socially, we'll call it socially distant, physically distant, and yet the amount of people that are willing to help one another. And so I would just offer asking that question to your team can be really powerful. Let's talk about then what we do with all of that information. So, and I'll just tell you, even though I love the picture, I hate this quote because it always makes me think like I'm such a slacker. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And you know what then I do? I read that same quote tomorrow when I haven't done anything or planted a tree. It is really interesting though, if I think about, I know we should have put a lot of things in place. I should do that now though, for the next time something's going to happen 20 years from now. So I'm going to give you another case study. I'll ask Sarah to jump in as we go through this. So we done a lot of work with a retailer in the US called Meijer Food Stores. About 70,000 team members. It's the 16th largest privately held company in the US. And they have about 248 stores. I think they're just breaking ground with a small format store in Detroit coming this summer. Really fantastic organization. We did some work with them pre-COVID, a couple of years of work we've done with them. Competency-based leadership for all of their positional leaders. Yes, technology solutions for recognition, as well as ongoing virtual skills development. In other words, preparing for, not necessarily knowing we're going to work from home, but because they're getting so much larger and they have all these stores, we were working on that. The result was a 25% decrease in total store turnover from the employee perspective there. What was really interesting, this links back when we mentioned your customer experience will never exceed your employee experience. As we ramp up the employee experience through leadership, we saw a 7-fold increase in customer service scores. And they had ran the typical kind of campaigns about customer service focused on just the customer. We gave them a focus on leadership internal, and that's what happened. Much deeper leadership bench strength, and then about a $1 million reinvestment in the business as a result of all the virtual-led training delivery, that ability to save some of that. Okay, so what was the COVID response they did? One was constant messaging back to Meijer values. So I mentioned before about pivoting around your purpose. You see those below. Customer focus, win with our team, a passion to compete. Not the customers are number one, it's customer focus, win with our team, passion to compete. They focused in on that and made those kind of messaging and the decisions based on those. They had specific calls to action for the leaders, flexibility and work arrangements, just like probably most of you have done. And this is a quote from the learning and development person. The work we did prior to COVID with developing our leaders was instrumental in our ability to navigate this challenge and preserve our culture. And you might say, well, great, Matt, we didn't do that. I know, you too didn't plant the tree 20 years ago. I can't help you, but you can plant it today is what we're saying, right? I know that quote drives me crazy about it. Okay, so what's the ongoing adaptation since we're in this adaptation portion of the change management? One is they've done virtual onboarding. They were hiring at one point around 8,000 new team members every single week to keep up with the demands. They had to do virtual onboarding. Sometimes it was at 10 p.m. at night. You were hired that day, 10 p.m., next day we're starting. They're maintaining momentum with the leadership development, and we're migrating some of our coursework over into this, the 2-day coursework into being more all online. And we'll get into some of that stuff that we're going to be sharing with you all. And then combining the online instruction with a lot of the sustainment activities. So as you mentioned, as we talk about, like this is a short form, 1-hour webinar, these type of thing to keep that adaptation going on. Sarah, what else would you add on this case study that I missed on this?
Just to underscore, I think the point that you already made, that we don't mean to suggest something that feels a little like, well, gosh, I didn't do all of that pre-work. One of the themes that we've been noticing is the real critical importance of speaking directly into your leadership and really delivering. This is from a leadership standpoint, how I expect you to behave during this time. So regardless if you did the training beforehand, one of the really critical things is not to skip over the fact that people just might not know. None of us have weathered this storm before. And so being really, really explicit about how leaders show up during this time is not a step to skip over.
Yeah, and a comment in the chat about, hey, look, you guys put up Facebook and they're talking about all these great things. They're a technology company and they're letting people, you know, they're increasing their performance evaluations or they're taking that away and they're giving bonuses. How do you do that in a manufacturing organization? And so I'll just start off and then ask Sarah to comment on this because we're a consultancy, but we sit within a manufacturing organization called Barry Waymiller. We make all the machines that make all the products you might purchase in a retail store like Meijer. And so you're absolutely correct. Very difficult. And more comments on this. Learn not to underestimate the willingness and interest in our teams being open and ready to take on new roles and to reinvent themselves as we reimagine the work. You're right, but just a statement of respect to someone who would be like, look, that's Facebook. They have a lot more quote unquote optionality perhaps built in. We would not disagree at all. You're totally right. I think we brought up the Facebook case to say, how can we learn from what other people are doing? I might not be able to do all of that, but what I can do is some of it. And so for Barry Waymer on the manufacturing side, we've done some similar things. We're pushing off some of the performance evaluations, looking at what were the deadlines before. How are we doing all the typical kind of safety standard things? As here in St. Louis, I think our return to work is phased approach. We're starting on Monday. As a manufacturing organization in corporate headquarters, we're going to do that in a phased approach coming back versus everybody just being said it's time to come back to work. Sir, what else would you add on that one?
Yeah, I think a lot of our experience comes from not necessarily this situation, but by integrating acquisitions. And so a parallel there would be we tend to buy a lot of organizations that are failing. They're going through trauma, as we all are. And so one of the things, people are fearful. They don't know what's going to happen. And just to say explicitly, if you are in that situation, you don't have all of these options, to say out loud, we are going to reinvent this business. It might require you to reinvent yourself to be a part of it. We're not going to shy away from it. I think it's a great comment put in the chat, that people tend to want to be really willing to lean into this. But am I stating that out loud? If you are in the situation of, a lot's going to change.
Yeah, thank you. So great case study of Meyer, still doing some really incredible work. I think they just donated like 750,000 masks to frontline workers there in that area. Okay, this is what we brought you through, and I know it was a lot. It's a lot of lists. It's a lot of questions. We're going to make sure you get all of these slides. I'm just going to recap this really quickly. On the assess portion, I'm taking in the new environment. I'm holding employee focus groups. I'm doing voice of customer, not like movie phone. Why don't you tell me what movie? And we're also considering a more formal survey, especially to get into how the work is structured. On a line, I'm looking at revising short and long-term objectives. I'm doing that, though, around my core purpose. I'm constantly bringing that up. I'm reiterating how the team works together, and I'm simplifying down those things I can and communicating what's next. And that communication, including how I feel like the behaviors of values, other perspectives, and the logic, but also making sure that in that communication, there's some emotion in that. On accommodate, I'm going to create some optionality. I'm going to determine what I can let go of. What do I need to say no to during this time? And then on the adapt portion of this, how am I continuously iterating? I'm literally using this cycle and establishing feedback loops with my customers and, of course, my employees. So I do want, and I see the chat coming in about people saying, hey, here are some other things we can do. So what I'd like to do is, if you don't mind, I'm just going to bring us back into Mentimeter, and we're going to allow you to put some more of that in. We'll download this entire Mentimeter deck and provide it all to you by close of business today. But why don't you put in here, what have you learned or will do differently as a result of this webinar? The reason we ask this question, it's not exactly just for us. It's for you all, the 100 and something people that are on this, the ability to speak to one another and say, here's what I'm really going to focus in on. And right on cue, I get focused groups. That's perfect. And if you can't put that in there, just put it in the chat and Jamie will put that in there. And I know it seems like, well, this is just a lot of questions. It is. The reason we ask that is it's almost, this is going to sound a little darker than it is. You can hijack someone's thinking. And I don't mean it in a bad way. What I mean it is, I can get instant focus when I ask a question like, what can we let go of? Everyone in that meeting right now is going to be thinking about, all right, what are the things we're doing we probably shouldn't be doing? And so this is the reason for a lot of these open-ended questions. Reach out to colleagues for feedback. That's a great one. Internal focus groups. And I tell you, like the most important, and we're going to run a webinar on customer service and how we do that. The lever that you pull that has such an impact on customer service is how my people inside are being treated. And one of the biggest levers inside of that is leadership. I like if someone just says, only talk 5%. I love it.
Just a short story on that note. I know a lot of people are putting in focus groups, which we do highly, highly recommend. Working with one of our clients, and we don't always do it this way, but it seemed like it was the right thing to do at the time. They have a partnership structure. And so we did focus groups with them. We actually were the ones who facilitated those focus groups. And then we asked the partners to listen, and we gave them some really explicit rules. And basically, which were, you are going to take copious notes.
You're going to bring this up, are you?
You are not going to say a word. And so what was fascinating from this is, one, how difficult it was And so one observation from those leaders, from the partners, were like, oh my gosh, it was so difficult. So there's an inertia because we want to contribute to the conversation. But then also, I can't believe the information that I got. And I wouldn't have gotten that information if I had jumped in and essentially kind of was the rudder to steer the conversation. And so just some thinking through of who's facilitating, and would you consider, and saying out loud, like, I'm not allowed to talk. I'm going to take copious notes. I am the note taker in this meeting. And if you think, so that people understand what the context is, but it can be really, really valuable.
Yep. And since we're talking focus groups, both internal and the voice of the customer, the reason we like these, and I understand that probably I should mention this, it's a little easier to scale an online survey. It just is. You get more data, you get it fixed faster. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. The reason we like the focus groups is at the same time I'm getting great information, I'm also building the relationship. I'm in listening mode, which builds more trust. I show that I care by asking someone's input, what they value and what they think about something. So that's the other reason why we really like those. We recognize they are more work. And so setting those up and being very explicit and diligent on who I'm talking to, the groups that are put together. And I love Sarah brought that up, the partners, when the comments that they had about, I can't believe all great information, they said that in the session as well. So you might imagine coming out of that, the trust they have and taking that back. So that's a great one. As I bring us back into this part, I do have a few more things to show you, but I am going to just drop a quick poll in here if you don't mind. It's just feedback to us. So I'm going to launch this poll at this time. So if you don't mind, just fill that out and let us know how this went for you today, this webinar. We do have a question from, and in the chat as well, that says, do you think that online meetings are missing the nuances of conversations that we're missing on the coffee break, chit chat? How do we mitigate, if at all? Good question. Appreciate you putting that in there, David. So the question is, are we missing the nuances of conversations? And if I'm getting this right, and David, you have to put it in chat again if we're missing this, but the nuances of the coffee is almost like the personal connection. Maybe it's the slight, what's someone's tone? What are their nonverbal saying? And what's the personal connection? Like, how are they doing in their life itself? It's why, number one, do I think that we're missing out on those? Or without a doubt, probably to some extent. The better question that you're asking, I think, is how do we mitigate that? One is why we're huge proponents of when we're doing this work is people are on video. It becomes the norm inside of organizations that when we have these chats, we're going to be on video. The other thing we do is, and if you've been on some of our communication webinars, when I start a meeting, I structure the meeting huddles, if you will, or the team check-ins. I structure them that the very first thing we're going to talk about is who would like to recognize someone else. Again, a process or a system. I'm creating that so people can talk to one another. Here's what you did. Here's what I appreciate. When I'm trying to go through this change management process a lot, I get it wrong a lot. And so I can constantly iterate and do it better, but I also want to make sure I'm recognizing the effort people are putting in and when we're getting it correct. The last thing we end with in that structured meeting is some personal connection. I put it at the bottom because I don't want it to take over what the business aspects we need to discuss, but I do want people to actually have a chance to talk about what's going on in their personal life, that human-to-human connection. Anything to add on that, sir?
Nothing to add on that one. I do see another question coming in. Any guidance for how to communicate the plan for transition back to the office for workers who have been remote? I think we can incorporate focus groups into this, but any other thoughts? Obviously, we'd want to ask a lot of questions. What's the size of the organization? How many people are we talking about? Simple things, obviously video, if at all possible, whether that's a recorded message that's going out or it is a live that people can kind of call into so that it's not just a one-way transmit. And so I think the inclination is I'm going to send out a beautifully written memo. I'm going to, put out that communication. I don't necessarily have that venue where I can ask some questions or express some concerns. So video, trying to make it a two-way conversation. What input am I allowing people? So if I am able to get people's input, are there specific things I'm guiding that input? Here's what we have to do, and maybe that's safety related or policy related. Here are the areas where we would genuinely like your input so that people feel like they're actually a part of the change.
Yep, thank you. And I know Jane put in one of the things she's doing is starting some of the meetings 10 minutes early. If people want to join in, I know that works for some organizations. I know for some organizations, and I'll just speak for myself here, we're just slammed back to back to back to back meetings. But it is a good example, and it's why for these webinars, we start them 10 minutes early. We're playing some music and chatting with you for the folks that come in a little bit early. This was the greatest hits album. We said it was 7, then we said there are 2 bonus tracks, so it became the greatest hits of 9, and we've really enjoyed like putting this to music. And so you're like, well, that's it, right? You guys gave some stuff away and now you're not. No, it is not The Last Dance. We are launching a new series. It's called Replay. Rapidly adapt to the changing game. We're going to deep dive into this, give you some more tools, resources. I don't know if we're bringing Seinfeld back. We're going to bring something back. We're going to bring LL Cool J into this. We're going to bring in music. We're going to bring in pop culture. We'll bring in art. And maybe even, you know what, if you want us, as we build these out, we have content, but obviously we build them for more webinar format. If you want us to fit in something, just name it. You want the Fibonacci sequence? Done. We'll put it in there. You want some art? We'll get that. You want Hello Kitty? All right, fine. You want country music?
We did. We got it in.
That's it. That's all we're doing. Anyway, seriously, if you know, The Last Dance is a really incredible documentary about Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls. Really fantastic, being shown right now on ESPN. There are 2 versions, mature audience and TV 14. I recommend the mature audience. It's really good. Okay, we are going to put this on. So this is what it is, a deep dive. Training camp, assessing the new lineups. It's going to be a lot on basically literally what assessments you can run with people to make sure you have the right people in the right place. Training camp is a lot on the rapid change and change management. Building your bench, we've got a really cool tool that we're going to work. And I know what, there's a typo here with one specific 2. It's not 2, it's a tool. Somebody stole our L or something. We were charged by consonants, so we left it off. It's a really great tool that both helps in relationships, but also extraordinarily powerful from a leadership capacity. So we'll dive into that on Build Your Bench. The next one is Compete. We're going to go into that, and that is going to be on inclusivity, actually. And you think, wait a second, why are we worried about diversity and inclusion? Because it's literally how I bring people together. And so we're going to give you a really cool webinar format, 1 hour on inclusivity. The last one is Win, and that's going to be customer service. We're going to dive into not just a quick voice of the customer. We're going to get into how we actually train our clients and work with them on customer service. And you might ask, well, how much is this costing, right? You guys brought us in with the greatest hits. You made it for free, and now these cost? No, they do not, which is why we're failing as a business. No, they do not cost. We're giving this away during this time. We figure the best thing we can do is to serve all of you. So these are no charge. There are also no seat limitations. So if you wanted 5,000 people in your organization to be in, fine. Send it around. And do us a favor if you don't mind. We're happy to invest our time and to put these out. It would be really helpful if you guys shared these with anyone. We're just trying to help. And so the more that you can share these on social media and with your network or with your customers or clients, happy to do that. More the merrier. So this will give you a website on where you can sign up for these, but these start on May 26th. We'll run 1 a week. They're all on, I believe, a Tuesday at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We'll run these for you. We are CCO Leadership. That's the Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute. You can reach us at ccoleadership.com. Best place to go is resources, and you can a whole bunch of tools. It's all open source. There's no gated content. You don't even have to give us your email. You can just grab it. That's my email. That's how we help and work with people. We assess teams and cultures, as you mentioned, as we saw. We do help with strategic plan, executive coaching. We are going to be launching some of this leadership development. We're going to be launching a subscription service. So any of you that have signed up for these webinars, we'll let you know when that's coming out. It will start in June, a very low economic way to get your leaders and people in and going through this training together. The last event I want to mention, this is something that Jamie kind of leads, our colleague here. We have our Include curriculum, our diversity inclusion part. It is a 2-part online course, not a webinar, but a course. It runs from 10 to 12 p.m. Central Daylight Time, both on May 21st. Then there's some work that people are doing between that in their workplaces. And then we come back and do the second session for 2 hours on June 4th. Not a webinar, but an actual course. It is online. There are no fees. And again, there are no seat restrictions. So just let us know if you're interested in that. I am going to get some music ready to play. And Sarah is going to say some smart things and wish you all to be safe and wash your hands in her best mom voice.
Wash your hands.
That's a good one. That's really good. That's really good.
All right. Thanks y'all for being here.